Welcome to Recap King. In this video, we will explain The Tax Collector. This movie tells the story of a tax collector who works for one of the biggest gang leaders in Los Angeles, and he finds his family's safety compromised when the rival of his boss upends the business. Will he be able to become the ruler of the gangsters with the safety of his family as a guarantee? Let's find out in The Tax Collector. The Tax Collector begins by showing a husband and wife named David and Alexis in their bedroom. Alexis woke up from a bad dream about their two children. Knowing that his wife was very worried, David then tried to calm her down, saying that it was all just a dream. Not long after, their daughter came into the room to wake them up and asked her parents to take a shower and get ready because that day was an important day, where Alexis' family would gather at their house to celebrate Alexis' niece's 15th birthday. The celebration is important for the birthday girl because the age of 15 marks the transition from childhood to teenager. After having breakfast with his family, David rushes to work at an electronics store, where he hires his cousin, a woman named Lupe. However, David was often annoyed with Lupe because she threw wild parties with her friends at the shop, making the place a mess. David had threatened to fire Lupe, but she didn't care. Not long after, a man named Creeper came there. Creeper is David's best friend and partner in doing his job. When they were about to leave, a group of thugs led by Victor, a gangster who had just been promoted, came. Despite being the chief gangster, Victor looks submissive and disdainful of David and Creeper, as both are known to be the most dangerous gangsters in the area. Victor tells David and Creeper that his gang is often bullied and belittled by other gangs and asks them both to solve the problem. As usual, Victor then handed over the tax dues to David and Creeper as it was a must for local gangs in the West if they wanted their business to run smoothly, safely and under control. David then emphasized that all local gangs in the West must submit and obey them and submit a tax contribution of 30% of the total profit every month. David and Creeper are the tax collectors and law enforcement who collect some of the business profits of 43 local gangs in the West for their boss, the Wizard, who runs his sprawling criminal enterprise from behind bars. If anyone disobeys or plans a rebellion, then they will not hesitate to slaughter them all. After that, David and Creeper visited David's uncle, Louis, to confirm the payment that had been made by Victor. While David's father, Wizard, is in prison, Louis takes over his powers temporarily. He runs his business, including setting tax dues and tax collection due dates for all local gangs who do business in their area, while David and Creeper will collect gang tax payments scattered throughout the city. On the way while they were doing their job, David always talked about his happy little family and made fun of Creeper, who is still single at his mature age. However, Creeper doesn't seem interested in committing to any woman, even though David often sets Creeper to some nice women he knows. David and Creeper then arrived at the headquarters of the gangsters and immediately collected the tax dues of 30%, according to what had been determined. The gangsters looked scared and submissive to David, especially after he threatened to chop off their heads if they didn't obey his orders to stop disturbing Victor's gang. While visiting the headquarters of other gang members, David and Creeper see a man from a gang called Bloods being tortured for sleeping with the gang member's girlfriend. However, David instead ordered them to release the man because the kidnapping and torture would trigger a war between the gangs that would actually cost both sides a lot. Hearing this, the gang members finally understood and obeyed David's orders. David and Creeper then drove the man to the Bloods' headquarters, where they later met the Bloods' leader, a man named Bone. David told Bone that what happened to one of his men was personal and had nothing to do with power and business between gangs that could trigger war. After getting an explanation from David, Bone then thanked him because if such a trivial thing caused a war between gangs, their business would be disrupted and suffer huge losses. David and Creeper then continue their work and visit a gangster who uses his clothing store as a cover to run an illegal business. Seeing the arrival of David and Creeper, the man immediately handed over the cash he had prepared to pay the monthly tax dues. However, the man instead said things that offended Creeper so that he pointed a gun at him. David immediately interrupted them and calmed Creeper not to act rashly. David then got a call from his wife who asked him to come to a clothing store immediately, where it turned out that Alexis asked her husband to intimidate the shop owner who was reluctant to sell the dress to her niece, even though her niece really liked the dress and only wanted the dress to be worn on her birthday. Without thinking, David immediately complied with Alexis' request so that her niece got the dress she wanted and everyone was happy. After that, David and Creeper returned to continue their work to completion. That night, when David and Alexis were counting all the money that they had collected from the Mafia, they immediately realized that the money that Victor had deposited did not match the predetermined amount and was still $20,000 short. David was instantly angry, but Alexis tried to calm him down. That same night, David and Creeper immediately went to Victor's house to confront him for disobeying the rules. Victor then told his wife to take the remaining money hidden in the refrigerator. When David was about to shoot Victor, he then confessed to David that he had to take the money to pay for the treatment of his daughter who had leukemia. Victor then showed some photos of his daughter treated at the hospital. David, who is also a father, understands the problems faced by Victor and decides not to take the money and invites Creeper to get out of there immediately. On the way home, David got a message from his uncle to collect tax dues of $200,000 to a gangster named Venom right away. Without thinking, they rushed to Venom's place. Arriving there, David and Creeper were greeted by a woman named Gata who immediately took them to meet Venom. Seeing the arrival of David and Creeper, Venom then took out a wad of cash as tax contributions. However, when Creeper was about to take the money, Venom stopped him, saying that the money was not for them. Not long after, a man named Canijo entered the room and announced that from now on Venom would only pay taxes to him. Canijo also said that soon all gangsters in the West would pay taxes only to him. Hearing this, David tries to remain calm and invites Creeper to get out of there because the place is full of armed Canijo henchmen and they won't be able to win against all of them. On the way home, Creeper looked annoyed and excited because he had been waiting for a fierce battle that might happen soon. He seems to really miss the times when they often got into fights because lately, he feels bored with his work. However, David asks Creeper to remain calm and devise the perfect strategy to deal with Canijo, who is not a random person, but a leader of a criminal organization that controls the East. David and Creeper then meet Louis and tell him everything happened at Venom's place and Canijo's involvement. Louis said that all gangsters in the East were very submissive and afraid of Canijo because he was a very cruel and dangerous man. Canijo used to be very submissive to the wizard, but after David's father was imprisoned, he took action and wanted to dominate the entire West. David then suggests that they slaughter Canijo and his henchmen, but instead Louis wants to hold a vote on whether they will attack Canijo and his henchmen or make peace with him. David thought that Louis might be afraid of Canijo. Still, Louis immediately insisted that he could have beheaded David right then and there if he wasn't his nephew for underestimating him. When David and Alexis celebrated Alexis' niece's birthday by throwing a big party at their house, Louis came and told David that he and Canijo would have a meeting, where Canijo intended to apologize for disturbing them the peace and promised would soon leave the West. Hearing this, David was relieved because there would be no bloodshed like he had been worried about. After Louis left, David then danced with his wife and had a great time. However, towards midnight, Gata suddenly came to the party and asked David to check his cell phone, and told him and Creeper to come to a nightclub. Once there, David and Creeper meet up with Canijo and Gata. David immediately asked the whereabouts of his uncle, to which Canijo told him that he had killed Louis and showed them Louis' severed head. David was still trying to contain himself, even though he looked very angry. Canijo then offers to cooperate with David and Creeper, and promises a much bigger profit if they both agree to join his group. Canijo then clenched his fist and asked David to kiss all the rings on his finger to acknowledge that he had joined Canijo's group. It was clear that David didn't want to do that and ignored Canijo's request, then immediately left there with Creeper. David and Creeper's refusal turned out to be a hard slap for Canijo. The next day, David and Creeper gather the gangsters who are still loyal to them and devise a plan to attack Canijo and his henchmen. However, in the middle of the meeting, Gata and Canijo's henchmen carry out a sudden attack, so the gangsters try to save themselves, including David, who is worried about the safety of his family. On the other hand, Canijo's henchmen manage to slaughter all of David's men and corner Creeper, capture him. Meanwhile, David rushes to escape and picks up Alexis at work, intending to take her family to safety. On the way, he gets a video call showing Gata smashing Creeper's leg with a hammer before Canijo stomps him to death. David looked furious, but he couldn't do anything to help Creeper. David and Alexis then pick up their children at school. He then takes Alexis to a hotel to secure her, where Alexis asks David not to fight Canijo after all that happened. David complied with his wife's request and promised to take his family away and start a new life. But before that, he had to do a few things, including sending their children to his sister, Delia, because it was pretty safe there, and going to Lupe's house to get something. David finally arrived at Lupe's house and asked her to get out of there as it was not safe. David then went into the backyard and started digging to find the nearly $2 million in cash he had stored there. Lupe then asked where David had that much money. He reveals that the money resulted from a robbery he did with Creeper 9 years ago. After putting all the money in the suitcase, David rushed back to the hotel to meet Alexis. However, how surprised he was when he found out Alexis had died. Racked with deep sadness and grief, David received news that his children had disappeared. Canijo then called David and gave him 2 hours to come before him with the ransom. In a state of urgency, David went to see Bone and said that all his henchmen had died because Canijo intended to dominate the West. Not only that, but he also told Bone that his wife had also died and his children had been kidnapped, so he had no other choice but to go to him and ask for his help to save his children. Bone is also willing to help David and gather his minions to attack Canijo and his minions. David, Bone and the Bloods gangsters attack a drug house, kill off Canijo's henchmen and interrogate one of Canijo's men, dragging his face on the ground from a moving car, and kill him after discovering the location of David's children. David and the others finally arrived at the scene and found his children safe, with no one there except Canijo's grandmother, who told him where Canijo had been hiding. At Canijo's hideout, David strangles a guard, while Bone is almost arrested but manages to kill 2 of Canijo's men. David then breaks into Canijo's room, where he kills Gata. David and Canijo then engaged in a fierce battle. At first, David was pressed and seriously injured by Canijo, but he managed to turn things around and brutally kill Canijo. Bone, who managed to survive, then took David away from there. When Bone suggested to David to treat his wound, David instead asked him to step aside and contact Wizard, who was none other than his father. David tells all that has happened to his father, but Wizard instead congratulates him for having succeeded in becoming the ruler of all the Mafia in Mexico after killing Canijo. However, David apparently refused to follow in his father's footsteps and hung up. The moral we can learn from this film is never to have a greedy attitude, because greed will only lead us to suffer, especially if our greed is accompanied by selfishness and likes to act arbitrarily.